Alright, so we'll go ahead and make a grabbable from scratch using this scaled down cube. And in the scaled down case or scaled up case, you want to make sure that your mesh is always a child of your grabbable. And it's probably good practice just to have your mesh as a child anyway in case you scale in the future. Otherwise the grabbing system will not work if your grabbable hierarchy is scaled down. Second thing to note, if your colliders that will be used for the hand detection system, if they're not going to be on the grabbable component, make sure to add a HVR grabbable child component. That way the grab detection system will link this object with its parent. By default, if you do not populate the parent grabbable field, this script will search up the tree and find the first one that it finds for you. Now with the grabbable selected, you can go to the toolbar and open up the HurricaneVR window. And this is just a little helper window to help you set up your grabbable object to save time. So with your grabbable object selected, you can press setup. It takes care of adding the grabbable component for you. It adds the grab points container for you and a first grab point for you. Now, one key note to always remember, keep your grab points object transform the default. If you change these values, it will mess up the grab system and your pose will not take effect when you grab the object. So with your grab point selected, you can start posing it by choosing either left or right hand, whichever one you're more comfortable with, to get the prefab spawned in the scene window. And just a few things to note here, we get position handle. If you click the cube, it turns into a rotation handle. And this is actually rotating and moving the actual hand child, your left hand preview. It's not moving the grab point. The grab point handle transform is here, and you can see the grab point is marked by the yellow sphere gizmo. And then each bone in your hand, you can rotate it without having to find it in the hierarchy window. So just a little shortcut to save on time. And this offset from the grab point of this gizmo can be set in the HVR settings. If you don't like where it is, by default I just put it 0.08 above the grab point, so hand pose handle offset. Alright, once you're satisfied with your settings, you can start posing the hand. And the easiest way to do that is using the new auto pose feature, which will start bending the fingers for you live in the editor. And most often this is not going to get such a perfect pose, but in this case it will because it's such a simple shape. But this is pretty useful for finding a base pose to start with, so you can turn off the auto pose and start manipulating the fingers manually if you need to. And once you're satisfied with the pose, and oh, we have an error. Not really an error, but what you want to do is make sure that your grab point is centered. So I had moved it earlier by accident, so let me go ahead and reset it. And we want to make sure that the grab point is kind of centered for two reasons. One, when we mirror the pose later, this symmetry looks nice, and then the visual grab indicator when you're hovering over an object is by default going to go where your grab point is. So now that we got that repositioned, let's move the hand instead using the handle here. Alright, now that it looks okay, we can stop the auto poser, preview the right hand, press the mirror on the left hand because that's the one that we posed. Come over here and press save as. Save it in the folder. If you had followed the HVR settings setup steps, it will take you to the default directory you set, which is assets poses for me. And go ahead and save the pose. Turn off your preview hands. come to your Grabbable and add your rigid body if you want it to behave with the physics. Add the rigid body last because sometimes if you have the rigid body on the component and you're trying to use the physics poser, sometimes it doesn't collide. So either disable it if this is a prefab, or remove it and add it back afterwards if you want to use the physics poser to quickly pose something. So if all is well, we should be able to hop into the editor right away and pick this cube up. So let's see if it works. Alright, as you can see, we can pick up the object and it's going to pose the hand just like we had told it to. Now the next thing to look at in the pose window is we have open and close, which is not so useful anymore because of the auto poser, but in case you just wanted to open or close your hand instead of using the auto poser, you can do that as well. Or if you just want to reset the hand, you can press it to open. And then we also have the finger tracking settings, and these settings are pre-populated with whatever you have set up in your HVR settings here. So whatever you have set up in your HVR settings, whenever you create a new HVR hand poser component, that is where the default settings come from. So if we hop back into play mode, we can just kind of manipulate this in the editor, making sure that we turn off the preview hand, otherwise you'll get spammed with errors. So since we have all these to close, the finger tracking should take effect. Right now I'm just touching the A and Y buttons on my left controller and the joystick. And because the thumb is set to 75%, the thumb is going to go ahead and move 75% of the way from open hand towards the pose that you set. So depending on what kind of behavior you want with the finger tracking system, you can set these per finger. Perhaps you don't want the index finger to stick out like this, like bonework style, or maybe you do. You can set this to default to 1, or maybe halfway. You know, whatever you think looks good to you. Right now I'm pulling the trigger down to make it go down all the way. So these settings are pretty flexible for you to set the pose system however you want it to work. If you don't want finger tracking at all, just make sure that your finger controls is set to static, either in your pose window here, and if you want that to be a global setting for all your future poses, these only affect future poses. You can set these all to static and your default start settings. And that about wraps it up for creating a very simple Grabbable and all the basics of the posing system. Thanks for watching.